That's
Just
all right, man.
tends to get a little busy at times.
No, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I can understand, man. But no, I appreciate it. I've been wanting to talk to you. I've been following you for a while now, obviously, and I know that I know we spoke briefly about like you've worked with some athletes that are good friends of mine as well. So
Yeah.
I've been watching you closely, man. Your stuff and all your videos and your information that you provide as well. So it was something that I really wanted to kind of chat. And I know you get a lot of probably questions about nutrition side, but my platform is all about the person themselves. And that's the
Yeah,
whole
cool.
idea of it. And I wanted to kind of dive into just, Jordan Sullivan, and, the man himself, as opposed to, we'll touch into obviously what you do and whatnot, but, I wanted to kind of touch like on just your history, man. And just kind of like, I guess, what kind of got you down this path as well? What got you down
Yeah,
this
yeah.
path, and what kind of inspired you to go down this path, man? So maybe we'll, start with that, I guess.
With how it started, or why I
Yeah,
wanted
yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. Just like in terms of you getting into nutrition, and I guess more deeper into it. But what kind of got you down this path?
Yeah, so I started nutrition at university in 2011. I think, yeah, it was my first year. So I did a undergrad in exercise nutrition science. I was always into sports. I guess like most kids like that grow up, and I was a pretty into, cricket, rugby and everything else. Rugby was my sport. I was mad in love with rugby. From the age of about 14, I thought I was going to do that as a career. And
Yeah,
then
union or
unfortunately
league?
union, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And then I turned like 17 and stopped growing, and that dream diminished pretty quick. But
Yeah.
I was always really mad into sports. But even when I was a bit younger, I really was a little bit of on the nerdy side, I suppose. And kind of as I went through high school, I remember like really falling in love with biology. I remember biology in particular in high school for whatever reason, like really spoke to me. And it was funny because I hated maths, but I loved chemistry, but I was never really that good at chemistry. And so I'd get very average grades in chemistry, but very good grades in biology. But I loved sports. So I always had this like really weird like relationship, and I in my mind they were all like always independent of each other. And I remember going to do you remember like those open days they do at
Mm, mm,
universities, or
mm,
like the
mm, mm.
days that the teachers or your parents would drag you to those, like, I don't know, we do it at like the convention center here, and there's all the unis, they have the pop-up stands. And I remember going there and seeing like a program for like human movement or sports science, and I was like, holy smokes, like I remember that was like the first time where I thought, wow, like all of it does go together. I was like, wait, you can do that together. And I always used to watch like the Gatorade ads, and I would always say to people like, I want to be like in the Gatorade ads, and they're like, what are you talking about? Like the athlete? And I'm like, no, 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 like the dude in the clipboard, like doing the math. So ever since like I found out like sports science was a thing, I really wanted to do it. So when I finished high school, like I jumped straight in. I went straight to exercise nutrition science, did that for a couple of years, and then I kind of fell out of love with it for a little while. And for whatever reason, then I guess I was hanging around with a lot of people. I ended up working in a hospital. And I think I wanted to go to like med school and do all that. And then that didn't end up working. And then I guess I was like, well, I was at kind of wit's end, as most like uni kids are. And I went, like I'll go back and do a master's. And I did a master's of dietetics. And it was kind of in there where I got exposed to, a lot of clinical stuff, which was really cool. But it made me realize that I didn't want to do the clinical like I thought I wanted to for a while, maybe realize I didn't. But it also made me like fall back in love with that sports science side of it. And I think the caveat to it, which most people in this area kind of realize upon graduation, is that there's not a lot of work. It's not like I distinctly remember typing in combat sports dietitian into Seek when I graduated. And
Yeah.
like to my surprise, there were zero jobs. And it was like shock horror. It's like there's no jobs. But
Yeah.
what I ended up doing was going to Canada because my brother was living in Canada. And I spent about 2.5 years over there. And that's really, I guess, where the seeds of like the Fight Dietitian and everything started. And that's where I kind of realized like, okay, like combat sports is a really big area. And I think over in North America, it was so popular.
Mm.
And I'd never really been exposed to that like in Australia. Like I'd always loved combat sports. I remember playing like UFC like on when I was like 14 on PlayStation 2 or Xbox One, like the real crappy graphics and stuff. And I remember like loving Anderson Silva and GSP, and like I used to box since I was like 12, 13, and like me and my friend would just go to PCYCs for years, and like we'd
Mm.
think we were being like, you know, Vitor Belfort and all these guys. But then when I got to North America, when I was a bit older, I was like, holy smokes, like this is on every bar. This is like, people love it. And it kind of made me realize like, hey, maybe I could like use the nutrition and put it to that. Cause at the time, that's when I like started doing jujitsu as well. Like to me, I didn't really know much about mixed martial arts until I was in North America. And then I started like jujitsu and I was like, oh, what's this? And then I started competing pretty frequently. And then I kind of fell in that world of like, okay, like you got to make weight, you got to do this. And in my mind, I was like, I got 2 degrees in this stuff. Like this should be a piece of cake. And then lo and behold, like it's not a piece of cake. It's not like straightforward, like chemistry, biology, and maths. There's like quite a lot to it. And I kind of did some like pretty rough like cuts just for like I remember my first jiu-jitsu comp, I cut like some ridiculous amount of, because that's just what everyone in the gym was doing.
Yeah,
So I was like, I guess you just do it. So and then like that kind of became a regular thing. I was like, I guess you just feel like this when you go to these comps, and they suck. Like I sucked. Like I got spanked, but I was like, oh, maybe I just need to get better at like training in this super depleted state. And like, this is meanwhile, I have 2 degrees while I'm thinking of this. And that kind of is what started the whole journey of like, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I kind of went and started exploring, and then one thing led to another. And probably about, 2.5 years down the track, that's when TFD started. But it kind of started with that.
So it was essentially your own curiosity that led you down that path. It wasn't really kind of advice or something that you saw someone else do in terms of like nutrition field, or even especially with combat sports. It was essentially your own experience that kind of led you down that path of, thinking, well, there's got to be a better way of cutting weight, or there's got to be a better way of performing, right?
Yeah, like I was really into it. I remember at university, like I was really into like how I remember looking up papers in there. I remember having an assignment and they'll like do it on whatever sport topic you want. And I chose like Muay Thai or something like that, like how hard they kick or something like that. But I remember like looking into the nutrition of combat sports, and it was just like very generic, like Australian Institute of Sport guidelines, which were like super generic, you could never use. But there was one guy that I really liked his work, Dr. Reed Reel. He was doing his PhD at the time. And I remember at university, I was like, oh, maybe I could get it like an internship with him. And it just so happened like the year that I graduated, he took a job in Florida at the Gatorade Sports Institute or something. So he like traveled halfway around. So I was like, oh, I guess there goes that, right? Like there's no chance I could even talk to him now. So I was like, I know what, let that dream sail. And I was like, whatever, I'm dipping to Canada. Let's go over there. But it's funny because like me and Reed are like quite good colleagues now. We talk quite a lot. So it's funny how that kind of comes full circle.
Yeah, you put it out to the universe, that's why.
Yeah, that's right. Eh?
And when was kind of your first did you start working with local athletes originally at the start, like once kind of TFD took off and you kind of went into that that world? Did you start just kind of working with local athletes, to kind of see, to put your studies and your knowledge and your understanding of nutrition and weight cutting and peak performance?
Yeah. I guess TFD kind of officially started. It was only about 2 years ago that I was working in a sports clinic. So we had a couple fighters come through there, and I was like kind of like low-key the guy that they would send to because I was really into it. And like I had done in my time in Canada when I was in those gyms, you just in the gym with your teammates and you're like, okay, like let's do this, let's do that. Like, hey, how crappy did we feel at that comp? Like, let's try and eat less carbs and maybe that'll make us feel any better next time. And it never does. And then it's like, so I had that kind of bro-y experience, I guess you would say, into it. But yeah, I guess on the local scene, I had like maybe like only 3 or 4 through that sports clinic. And it was more like trying to find good information. Like I said, there's just not a lot. Like I guess the Australian Institute of Sport had a bit and some pretty generic guidelines, but you'll find in that area that, and this is something that I'm kind of like really passionate about changing, is like there's not really much information that say you or me could just Google and find like good information that you could practically apply. And I want to change that because I've been there where I've had like these couple of athletes through the clinic and I'm like, I'm meant to be the dietitian. I'm meant to be the guy guiding these, and there's no good information. Or there's so many holes in the process. So even though there was like a few papers here and there, like yeah, those early athletes that I took through that sports clinic, it was really a lot of trial and error. And like, I had to like really reach out and read the work of teams from like North America who were a bit more ahead of the curve. And even those guys, like, and I talk about it quite a lot. It's probably like the best and worst thing. They were probably one of the most advanced teams. Like I ended up linking up with them and doing was really bad in the sport. Like I came to realize was really bad, yet they were kind of the leaders in the area. And that was what really fueled me and made me realize like, holy crap, like just overall everywhere, this needs to change. So it was like early on in the clinic, I had these athletes. I was looking for information around here. On the academic side, there was really not a lot. And then you kind of look on the practical side in the North American scene where you got like the Mike Dolces, the perfecting athletes, the like George Lockhart's, like those type of guys. But even those systems, like even though they were working, like Mike was working with like Ronda Rousey, perfecting athletes, works with heaps of people, like George was working with like Conor McGregor. Even those processes were pretty like broy in a sense.
Really?
So there was just, there was even like quite a gap in all of this. So it was like,
wow,
man, what do we do? What do we do?
Yeah.
So it was very interesting. And that's really what made me realize from a business sense, I was like, it will work. Like, and a lot of people said, man, that's too niche. It's like a really weird field. But I was lucky enough that like I had that experience in Australia where it was like, it just doesn't exist. And I know it doesn't exist. And the only person that was kind of doing it has gone to America now. And then I was in North America doing it around the gyms. And, I lived in Toronto, I lived in Vancouver, I lived up in the Rocky Mountains, did it all in those places, realized no one there had an idea, managed to link up with like one of those teams that were doing it with like UFC athletes, realized they had no idea what they were doing. And that's when I was like, oh, smokes, like from a business sense, this is like a really open field, but it's so niche, no one's really touching it.
Yeah, and that's crazy, man. I mean, and so obviously, outside of just like, information and knowledge that you've kind of studied yourself and read up on, did you ever, is it, did you kind of try to grab little bits from I guess different people in the field of expertise, and then kind of go down the track of what you felt was the right way to go about it in terms of nutrition, in terms of dietary requirements and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely, man. There was a couple of books that I really like Dr. Real had a book. The guy that I was saying that went over, he released a book, Combat Sports Nutrition. Clint Wattenberg, who's the head of the nutrition at the UFC now, had a book out. So that was like good information. But a lot of it was like not that practical. Again, it was like you'd read it and I'd still be like, well, how do I do this with the athlete that's sitting in front of me? And like, there's a lot of good research that comes out. Like there's a team in Liverpool, John Moores, that have been putting out research in this area since 2011. But even still, it was kind of like, oh, I'm kind of struggling to put this into practice when athletes are in front of me. Like I could talk to you and tell you the theory about, okay, like we need to have carbs here, and then on the fight week we need to strip carbs.
What were some of those? Yeah, what were some of those like? What were some of those challenges?
Yeah, so it was like I remember the first time someone came in and they told me like, okay, I've got to lose. So Diego Pereira was one of my first athletes that I worked with in Brisbane, and he's quite big on the local scene, but at the time, and he doesn't even cut a lot of weight. And it was like, okay, but he had to lose so much more weight than what I had dealt with any other client in any other setting. So it was kind of like in all these papers and all these books, they say, okay, like no one really paints it out like, okay, this is how many calories this person should eat, or with this training session, they need to fuel differently. Say wrestling needs to fuel very differently to BJJ, and Muay Thai is a completely different fueling strategy to this and this. And this is how you go about determining like what the workload is and across those sessions, and then what it looks like over the week. Like it was all very generic, like, okay, put carbs before the training because, combat sports are a glycolytic sport. And it's like, okay, that's great and all. And it's like, okay. And after a workout, put carbs back in with protein and blah, blah, blah. And then like, keep fat to a minimal to keep calories down, which is all good advice and everything.
But it's the finer details.
It's the finer details when you've got someone in front of me and they're like, hey man, on Wednesday, like I felt okay. But Thursday when I do this crazy 3-hour wrestling session, like I was so stuffed. And I'm like, well, like, did you do this? And they're like, yeah. And you're like, okay, well, I just got to adjust. And that's how I kind of learned it throughout. And I guess like linking up with all different types of researchers definitely helped with that. But it was that kind of connection, like, yeah, all the theories up here, but when you've got someone and you're doing it in real time, you're like, oh crap, like
It's
there
not
is
gonna,
a
it's
bit.
not gonna go 80. Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
gonna
you
go.
know, it's like
Yeah,
it doesn't play out like the textbook told
yeah.
you to. And I
Gotcha,
think
gotcha, gotcha.
anyone that's kind of been in like any type of science or health science will realize that. Like when you read the textbook, it's like when you get someone in front of you and it's what the textbook says.
It's like, I guess everyone's like different shape, size, their bodies react differently as well, right? Tell me a little bit about the process. Like, I guess in a daily life, for yourself, an athlete approaches you. What are some of the key things that you kind of, I guess, that you look into, to provide the right advice and to an athlete?
Yeah, like we start with everyone that comes through like a pretty thorough assessment, like of their medical assessment, dietary assessment, allergies, intolerances, medical history, all of that. Like you're getting like the weight cutting history. Have they cut weight before? How did it go? What happened? And so what's their goals that they want to improve on? Is it they just want to feel better during camp? They had a really bad time cutting weight last time and they need to improve that, or they felt terrible going in the ring. Like get a really complete idea of what they want. But then it's like collecting the data on the person. So getting like body composition data. So they can go get a DEXA scan ideally, so you can understand how much lean mass they have, how much fat mass they have, get an idea of how much water is in their body, and assessing that body composition is really important because when you plan that fight camp period, you want to lose body fat, right? Like you want to preserve your muscle and lose body fat, but even making an assessment of, okay, that's a right weight category for you is very difficult to do if you don't have information on their body composition. So it's like you come to me and say, hey, I'm 85 kilos. You making that, if you're 20% body fat is probably not too bad. But if you're coming to me and you're 5% body fat and there's not a lot of fat to lose as it is, I'd be going, well, like that, you've got about 4 kilos of fat. That's probably going to be pushing it a bit too much. Let's go up a weight class. So doing that body composition assessment is really important. So then you can plan out your fight camp phase. You can figure out, okay, well, we need to get a rate of weight loss that equals 0.5 to a kilo a week or 700 grams a week. And we're going to aim to do that. That'll inform your nutrition strategy. When you're planning your nutrition strategy, like I said earlier, it's really important to understand the training because that is something that's really unique and different in this sport in that it's not, although the workload is pretty consistent and it's a pretty consistent workload, it's a high workload. And it's a workload that's a lot higher than I think people understand unless you've done it. So I don't think people quite understand how energy intense like wrestling is or like Muay Thai can be and like how crazy it just can be and exactly what the calorie demand is. So it's like for these fighters, like the first bit of feedback like we always get is like, man, I can't eat that much. And it's like, yes, you can. Like you're burning an insane amount of calories to do this activity. You can eat that much and you can still be in a deficit almost. Some of these athletes who are like pros training twice a day, it's a struggle to get the amount of food in that they need, even to be in a deficit, even when you're like, hey, eat chocolate and get some ice cream in and do all of that because just how intense the training is. So understanding the training protocol is really important because yes, we need to fuel the training. We need to be in a deficit at the end of the week to reach that weight loss per week. But there's also like metabolic considerations in there. It's like you can get more enhanced fat burning by the way you periodize your training in there, and you want to make sure like wrestling or sparring, those high intensity sessions, you've got a lot more calories in on those days. So you can plan that within a week. But then ultimately what you want to do, and it starts here with the assessment, is you can make a judgment call like, okay, 1 week out from the fight, based on this data you've given me over here, I'm pretty confident we can go in, say 10% over your weight and we can make that weight. So say if you're 70 kilos or you're fighting at 70 kilos, I would say, okay, if we can come into that fight week at 77 kilos, I'm pretty confident we can safely get you there. And then say if you're 85 kilos, then that's okay. We got to go from 85 to 77 in that fight camp, slowly come down, and then we use our acute weight loss strategies or fight week strategies to come down to the 70. So that's pretty much how we go about planning it.
That's crazy, man. I mean, it's just funny because, like, you know, especially with weight cutting, as you would know, it's such a old traditional way. Like, you think weight cutting, I've got to starve myself. You know what I mean? And I've been, I watched, I think it was your latest video where you were breaking down Darren Till's weight cut for his, it must have been for one of his welterweight bouts, because he wouldn't cut like that for middleweight. But it's just, it's interesting. I've like, obviously, you worked with someone I know is Ricky, who's the pro boxer, and I remember training with him, and he was obviously on your, you had provided him with a diet plan, and I remember we just finished sparring, and I asked him, I'm like, how are you feeling? And he, you know, he was just telling me, he's like, man, it's like I get to eat, but I feel good. You know, like I feel good, and he was dropping weight, and it was interesting. And I you know, and I've always found it interesting that, especially because, like I said, that the traditional idea of weight cutting, right, is you strip water and you starve yourself. But it just shows you that if you go about it the right way, you could be training hard and still be eating, you know, and still be able to reach your weight goals. And on top of that, be able to actually feel really good when you're competing, which is, I think, the biggest part of it all, is that, you know, actually being able to perform at your best. And sometimes, you know, when you make weight, you're happy, right? You're like, fuck, I've made weight, you know, and, you know, but, and then, and then you may win the fight, but there's no way of scaling or how better you can go. And I'm assuming that a lot of people that have come to you, you know, that have come to you for that advice and for your help, you know, tell me, like, what are some of the feedbacks? And I'm assuming that, you know, like, they must feel like $1 million, compared to probably some of their old methods of how they've gone about cutting weight.
Yeah, it really depends. Hey, like some guys, if they're coming from that really like traditional background, like but I get that. Like, I get that old background because, like, I grew up in old school boxing gyms, and like my first couple weight cuts I did were like that. Like, and that was just what our coach, and you kind of, I can appreciate like how being hungry and putting yourself through that, you get that mentality. It's like, I call it like that animal mindset. Like, I used to get that, and you'd go on the mats and you'd be like, I'm not losing because I sacrifice way more than you, but then you end up losing because you're just underfueled and they're way better fueled than you. So it's like, I understand that mindset, but it's like the goal, like you're going through like a fight camp or or training or comp prep or whatever you're doing. The goal of that is not to lose weight. Like, it's not a weight loss challenge. You don't weigh in and then the game's over. Like, you've got to compete. Like, the whole idea of training is to be better. So it's like, that's a lot of feedback we get is around that training nutrition, because we put a lot of focus on it, because the goal is to get better, right? And you only get better by training better. And like, I've done that before. I've sacrificed training to lose weight, and it sucks. Like, and you obsess over your weight and everything. It's not a good way to go about it. And that's the first bit of feedback we get from everyone, is exactly like what Ricky said. Is like, oh my God, I feel really good around these training sessions. And I think a lot of that stems from going back to what I said about education, of like just how hard these guys work. And even if it's not an exact science, and don't get me wrong, and we can get into all that, but like wearing heart rate monitors just to see, like, so these guys can see, like, dude, look how many calories you're burning, and you're eating like a salad after this, and you're eating beforehand, like, you need to fuel like all of this food and you'll burn it all off and then some type thing, and kind of giving them that education about how to fuel and then how to properly. Sports is tough, and it's tough on the body. So like, it's not uncommon by like, especially fight prep, comp prep, by Wednesday, you're so sore and you're beat up. And then that's when like your nutrition really comes in. It's because like, okay, what are you going to do from that day onwards? Are you going to make sure on Thursday you're fueled up going into that session, and then you're recovering and you're putting in everything you need? So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday aren't just like 50%, 60% sessions, that they're like the 80, 85, 90% sessions. Like, you're always going to get tired. But nutrition is just that thing that if you can get it where you'll be able to bang it out all throughout the camp. And that's kind of what I tell the guys is like, yeah, you're training nutrition week to week. If you can do that week to week leading up to a fight, you're probably going to be in a better spot than your opposition who didn't do that. So that's a big one we get. But yeah, training nutrition, like we get a lot of feedback around like the weight cut itself, like especially around the water cut, we call it, like the saunas and baths. Again, that's a very like old school boxing thing.
I was actually going to bring up we'll get into that, because I wanted to bring up it was in Western Australia. Her name was Jessica Lindsay. I don't know if you know, in 2017. Yeah. She passed away, and a lot of it was to do with the sacrifice of, like, obviously with the weight cutting with the no water. So, because you mentioned it, it triggered, and my brother's obviously a big fan, so he posed this question to me to make sure that I had asked you. So, yeah, tell me a little bit about that. The I guess the water side of the things as well, in terms of, you know, in terms of weight cutting, and the part two question, like at what point do you think, I mean, especially now, I just feel like there's a lot of, even just with having nutritionists, I feel even just in the world that I live in, and looking at a lot of my friends that are athletes and whatnot, right? You know, there's a lot of focus on it now, you know, and compared to, as far as I can remember, like I knew nothing about it. It's not till I, you know, mingled with the right people, then I thought, oh, wow, like these guys are, you know, on proper meals and whatnot. So talk a little bit about the water side of things, and how that, you know, in your eyes, the way you manage that, because that's crazy. Like, to me, like I've seen, you know, some people really struggle, especially when they just fully deplete themselves, and, you know, like ego and that manhood's a big thing, right? You're like, nah, I can fucking deplete it, you know, and like, you know what I mean? It's just a fucking mental, you know, in your head, you're like, it's an ego thing. But talk a little bit about that, man, because that's really, I feel like that's such a big part, an important part in just in training in general, you know, but let alone for high level athletes. So yeah, tell me a little bit about that and the importance of that.
Man, like hydration, again, put it in perspective, like hydration, I think is so important. Like over the last 12 months, TFD started like a side business where for the last 12 months, we just dropped an obscene amount of money into creating like a hydration product that combat athletes will actually take, because that's how important we think hydration is, and like how big of a problem it is. Like hydration, day-to-day training is super important. And you see it, like if these guys do 2 training sessions a day, I think combat sports are in a funny, it's in the gym, or you're not quite doing rugby and soccer training, but you're not quite an endurance athlete. And I think the conversation about having a really good hydration plan really comes into play, either if you're in a hot, humid environment or it's a long duration event. And the thing is, with combat sports, if you're crammed into a small gym, which most people are, you're wearing a gi or you're wearing skins or tights or whatever, it's a hot, humid environment. And the thing is, if you're training like most people do, they back Muay Thai into wrestling, and then they'll have like morning sessions as well. You're probably training 4 hours a day. So all of a sudden you've got a hot, humid environment and you've got a long duration event. So I think hydration is something that we don't take nearly as seriously as we should in combat sports. And that's a real focus during the fight camp. And I always say to my guys, like, take hydration seriously, because we're in a sport in that last 24 hours, we've got to purposely dehydrate. And the worst thing you can be when you get to that point, when you go through all the fight week strategies, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, you don't want to be dehydrated when you say you get to the time to sit in the bath or sit in the sauna, because like, unfortunately, like with what we saw with Jessica, is that you can die. And I think the thing with Jessica and with like the wrestlers from the NCAA wrestlers in America, from, you know, the fighters in one championship, all the other fighters that have sadly passed away from this, is that I honestly feel that it's probably completely avoidable with the right amount of education, if you had the right people around you. Because say Jessica, for example, was running for 3-4 days straight and not, which is just, no coach should ever be recommending that. Or I would hope that coaches or anyone that we've ever been involved with would see that and say, hey, no, that's absolutely not necessary.
You just froze out there for a second. I got up to the point where Jessica was running like 3-4 days a week. And what did you say just after that? Sorry.
Yeah. So like if she was running 3-4 days a week in a sauna suit, not putting any fluid in, like you would, you would hope that coaches would stop and say that's not necessary. And it really is not. And I think that hydration is so important, right? Like the human body is entirely made of water. It's 60-70% water. And yes, I think that's what we're starting to see now. And in the research, it's starting to back it up that there is probably a safe amount of water that you can sweat. Like, keep in mind, if you're training just on an average day, it's not uncommon to lose up to 2 kilos of sweat just in training.
Exactly.
That can be 3% of your body. So we have a rule at TFD when it comes to that part where you're in the sauna, you're in the bath, 4-5%. And the reason we say 4-5% is because that's what we can be confident in, say, an MMA setting when we've got 24 hours. We can put that fluid back in with the right electrolytes and a bit of glucose, and we can get that back to the cells in your body, and you're not going to be dehydrated when you compete, because anything more than 4-5%, there's a risk that that water, no matter how much you put in after weigh-ins, it's not going to get back in. So that's when we start talking about, okay, guys going into a fight with a dehydrated brain, guys going period. We know that dehydration causes lack of cognition, lack of reaction time, lack of maximal power output. So that's not the things you want going into a fight where you're locked into a cage with someone or a ring or whatever it is. So that whole thing about hydration, I feel like, isn't really talked about enough, but it's so important for these athletes.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, like you said, you mentioned some of the, I guess a lot of the athletes that have passed away in different organizations, and it's just crazy. And it always poses me to think, like you said, the people around them, right? Like, I just feel like, I mean, obviously I'm not there, but I always think, is there not like telling signs? You know what I mean? That they're struggling, or you know what I mean? And again, it's I guess, lack of education. But in terms of like, because you're up in Brizzy or Gold Coast?
Brizzy, yeah.
Brizzy, yeah. So in terms of like monitoring athletes, I know you got apps and stuff like that. How do you kind of? I know you got a team around you as well. But in terms of like monitoring athletes, how do you kind of, especially nowadays with kind of like the modern technology, how do you kind of monitor them and ensure that they're keeping up the standard and following all the protocols that you've kind of set up for them? I know you do a lot of like personal visits as well. I know, but is that kind of, I guess, if you don't do that, how do you kind of ensure that they're following the protocols?
I guess you can never really, unless you're right with them 24/7, you never really can, make sure they're doing it all the time. I guess that's just the nature of any job.
I guess if they're spending the money, right, they're gonna
make
sure.
Yeah, like I would think if they're gonna pay us that much, then they probably would. Like, and that's the other thing, right? Like, the clientele we tend to take on are pretty serious about this. It's like, especially like, I only work with a core group of guys, and then I've got other guys in the team who work with other people, and like my core group are all very, very serious athletes. Like if they're coming to me, they're going to do it. And same with like Jack, same with Kurt, same with Ryan, the other guys in the team, they're all pretty serious who goes on with them. But we monitor everything online. So we do a lot of online consulting. I guess the way that we maintain and ensure the safety is we have like really strict protocols. Like, we have really strict in our assessment. If people want to go to a weight class and we say no, if you want to keep working with us, you listen to us and we say no, and then we work on it and let's push it back this many months and we'll get your weight down, or okay, go see someone else. Like, we just have very strict protocols like that. We give everyone weight targets. You have to hit these weight targets. And by that fight week, you have to be this weight. And we're going to put in these strategies for 3-4 days. And we know that your weight's going to come down. So when it comes time to sitting in a bath and sauna, we're never doing more than 3 to 5%. Like, we have very set rules and protocols. And yes, every now and then you'll have to bend them. Yes, every now and then something will go wrong. But for 95% of the time, it's like, if you don't do it, like, I've pulled people out of world championship fights. I've pulled people out of really big fights because they didn't hit it. And it's just like, hey, you'll probably be more mad at me if something really bad happens and you wake up in a hospital rather than you not fighting, then you just rebook it 2 months later.
Yeah. And I guess you yourself, right, wouldn't be able to live with yourself if you knew, if you know as well, and you just kind of let him, let him kind of go into the wild, like not properly prepared as well. It's just as much important in their preparation as turning up to the gym and training as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. I wouldn't be able to, and to be honest, going right back to what I said before, like when I spoke about how I went over to North America and America and I saw, early on how all this was happening, I saw how even at like the highest level at UFC, these supposed experts that were guiding people were putting people through these extreme weight cuts and putting them through like saunas, and no one was monitoring blood pressure. No one seemed to have an idea of what signs you were looking for. Like, and then people were rocking up to the scales all depleted. And I just remember thinking like, that's not right. Like something's gone wrong here and there's not enough science. And I guess when I started the company, like that is like, I set like a few pillars, and everyone that comes on the team, I'm like, you have to uphold these. And one of them is using like evidence-backed science to make sure these guys are healthy, both in the short and long term. So it's like making sure you're checking their bloods, making sure when we're in that weight cut room, you're checking blood pressure, you're checking their signs, like, how to do CPR, how to put someone in a safety position, how to get further help if we need it. Like, you need to know all that, because it's a super risky, like, business, and it's a super risky practice doing this. I guess the way that I've safeguarded almost is like, we don't take on too many short notice fights, and we put everyone through like a proper 8-week camp, where even at 8 weeks out, we'll know, okay, this guy's a high risk person. And if they're too high risk, we just say, no, you need more time, or no, go work with someone else. And I'd say 99% of the time they listen to us and say, fine, we'll take the next fight. What do I need to do to get to that point that you'll be happy with, type thing, which is really good. Like, it's a really good thing.
Well, it shows you, I guess the trust goes both ways as well, right? Like they trust your advice and, the information you're providing to them as well, which is important. And you touched a bit on, when we were talking about weight cutting, and you were talking about how when you're kind of doing the studies and you're kind of breaking down the athlete and seeing, where they are and where they got to go. And then you sometimes find out that, hey, these guys aren't probably going to be able to cut down to that weight. Have you had athletes where you've provided that advice and said, hey man, you actually shouldn't, based on your body type, based on all these science, you should be going up a weight class as opposed to going down a weight class or cutting down? Yeah.
All the time.
I was gonna say, because I was thinking to myself, man, like there'll be a lot of people probably they'll be shocked to find out, like, what? Nah, like, because like the whole thing cutting weight, like have you done, like the whole idea is, that being the bigger guy in a lower weight division, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what
heaps of people. And it's like, but this is the other thing, right? Like, and it's like too tough for their own good, because you can push the human body through some serious stuff. Like, I don't know, you can get a little bottle of water and you can go survive in the desert for a few days, type thing. Like, the human body can really persevere through a lot of things. And I think a lot of bad things, or one of the worst habits that I think, and it's a hangover in this sport, is that it's a very results driven sport. And you see this happen a lot with fighters. I saw this happen with one of the first time I ever worked with him was the biggest cut ever. And after I worked with him, he made this one weight his whole career. And I said, not working with you until you go upper class. And he did, and he was much better for it. But the thing is that if you do it and they make that weight and they struggle for 8 weeks and they have a terrible weight cut and it's so horrible, but they go out in the octagon in the ring and they get a really good win, they remember that win. And then they associate everything that they did in that camp with winning. So you see this like a lot in the sport, where they might have a camp and it might go really, really, really well. Everything will be great. And then they don't win. And it's like, they'll look for somewhere to place blame or something. You see that a lot. Like, if they brought on like a strength conditioning coach, a dietitian, a breathwork coach or something, and it didn't work, they'll look to blame rather than what happened. Like, really professional level guys, you won't see it. More like the mid-range guys will. But that's something that's really bad, that I think promotes a lot of this bad weight cutting, is guys make it. They absolutely destroy themselves doing it, but then they put on a good performance. But just because you put on a good performance in the octagon or ring or whatever, doesn't mean you skipped out on all the negative health consequences that came from making that weight and getting, like, it's just 15 minutes. And again, these guys are mentally probably some of the toughest athletes ever. So they probably just push through a lot of it. not knowing what they've actually done to their body. And then they just keep doing it. And then we come in and go, nah, that's like ridiculous. You shouldn't be. And they're like, I'm winning. And it's like, I don't care. Like, that's not my job. Like, I'm not called a winning professional. I'm called a health professional. That's what I want to look after, your health. So it's like, you got to come up.
It's like, it's like saying, that's why I touched on it earlier when I said to you, like, even though they go in and they put in a good performance, it doesn't necessarily mean that in terms of nutrition and the way they've gone about it is the right way. It's like, saying you're relaxed and then you go and, you feel relaxed and then you go and do yoga. And then that's that next level of feeling relaxed. It's essentially kind of the same thing. Like, you may go and win, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And then you go about, following, for example, your protocols in terms of cutting weight and nutrition. And then you're like, holy shit, I thought I felt good, but now like I feel really good, and it's like, you don't know, because you feel good when you're winning, because you kind of like sweep all the everything that kind of associated with the training camp under the rug, because like you said, you got the result, you got the W, right? So you're happy, whereas I guess you don't know how good you can feel till you realize that when you introduce science into it, and you start to eat the right foods and you go about it so detailed, you realize, holy shit, I thought I was doing pretty good till and then you realize, holy shit, there's a whole nother level there waiting for me, So how about like with say with dietary, like I've noticed with a lot of the athletes, a lot of them have kind of pre-made nutrition that you provide to them. So is that, do you have a chef, or do you work with people like chefs or people that basically in the hospitality industry in order? Yeah. So that's kind of, so you kind of branch out and try to bring in like external people that can provide obviously something in terms of that, that field, in terms of, nutrition and cutting weight and whatnot.
That's something I noticed really early on. And it was, I guess, like my own experiences too, was like one of the hardest parts about like cutting weight and even just dieting and training and living your life and doing everything, was like spending so much time in the kitchen and like cooking the meals and like coming home from training. Like the last thing you want to do at 9 p.m. after training, like, is like, you want to cook. So it's like, that was a huge thing. Luckily, like very, very early on in my career, I got on with TikTok Nutrition, and he kind of looks after all of our guys from northern New South Wales up to Queensland. Like a lot of the Sydney guys go through Paul Epsimos, I think his last name is Epsimos, and he runs Athletes Nutrition. Like he works with Alex Volkanovski, he works with Joshy Coolabau and a bunch of those guys. But yeah, man, that's a game changer, because that I know exactly what they're getting in, because even when you're trying to do it yourself, it's kind of hard, like cooking, and you got to weigh everything out, and then you've got to put the right amount of oil and all that stuff in, and like you can get very lazy with it. It's very easy to get lazy with it and like cut corners. Whereas like if I know they're going through a meal prep, I know exactly what they're getting in and how much and yada 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 and all that. So it really dials in, and like to the point where the way we do it with those guys is we like give them a meal, like meal 1, 2, 3, and it'll be based around their training that day. So like really only 3 or 4 of the meals will look the same during the week, and then they'll have like 5 or 6 meals look different. Like all the meals throughout the day should be different to cater for the different training sessions. Like it's all calculated to work out over the week. We're in this deficit or whatever we need to be, but because we have like the luxury of the meal prep companies, we can really tailor in, okay, this meal he needs a lot more carbs, so put more carbs in, and this one he doesn't, so make it really fancy and put a nice salad and whatever else in there. So it really helps, man.
I think it goes both ways as well, bro, because I feel like as an athlete, if someone just says, hey, bro, here's all the food, this is what you need to eat, you're cheering, because you're like, you don't want to think about like, what do I need to put in my body, or how do I make that, or, and then you got all these bunch of things, and you're meant to put it together, right? Whereas if someone just comes and gives it to you, I feel like especially a high level athlete, you're cheering, because that's one part you don't have to worry about, after training, you go and it's all labeled and you know exactly what you need to eat at what time. So I feel like that's a massive luxury for athletes, to be able to be catered for, like in that sense.
For sure, man. And it's like, I think it takes a lot of stress off them as well. Like making weight and losing weight is stressful, because like as a science, nutrition is very murky. Like it's a very strange science. Like the best way and the easiest way to figure out if someone has no idea what they're talking about when it comes to nutrition science is they give you straight, blunt answers about something like, how do I lose weight? Well, you do this, you do that, because everything is like, well, it depends on this, and what if this happens, and okay, what context are we in? And it's a very like gray science. So it's very difficult when you've got all these other things going on in your life and you're trying to focus on training and performing and recovering and your strength conditioning and everything else, and your yoga and your sauna sessions.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. And then you've got this science of like nutrition where you're like, man, I don't friggin' like, it's so confusing. 1 week carbs good and 1 week carbs are bad. Like, what do I have then? So I think it just takes a lot of the mental stress off these athletes as well, where they can kind of relax, and then they can put that energy towards other things like their training and recovery and whatnot.
And in terms of just nutrition, in terms of just dietary, like, you know, without obviously going into a massive list of it, what are some of the core groups of like food that generally that, you know, athletes, you know, that are clients of yours that, you know, that eat during training camp or leading up to fights?
Carbs. I eat a lot of carbs. So carbs are super important for this sport. Like, we say like carbohydrates.
Like, do you mean sweet potato, brown rice, stuff like that?
Actual carbohydrates?
Yeah.
Sweet potato, oats, oatmeal, bread, whatever. Like, I don't really discriminate. Like, a carb's a carb to me, and need a lot of it. That's the thing. Is like cereal. Like, if you like, I've got guys that are burning so many calories. Like, you need to make it up, and you got to get the carbohydrates. So it's like, hey, go grab like a couple things of like chocolate and some ice cream and put that in there, because you need to get the calories in, type thing.
Wow.
But it's like, for the most part, I do like to keep it in camp. I wouldn't say like clean, because like we do incorporate like chocolate and ice cream and all those other things in there. But like the big ones are like, you know, quinoa, rice, oatmeal, potatoes, things like that. Bread, like bread gets really stigmatized for the gluten thing, but I think like a good rice sourdough or something, even if guys have a little bit of an upset, like something like that is really good. So like, and then a lot of good proteins, like lean proteins, like chicken, and then you've got your white fish and, you know, things like pork, and getting a good variety, and then getting your fatty meats in there as well, like salmons and chicken thighs, and, you know, good cuts of lamb and a nice cut of steak. Like, we use a lot of that stuff, and getting like good fats in. And I'm a big fan of getting like plant and marine based fats, so like salmons and, you know, tree nuts and things like that. Good olive oils, good oils and all things like that. You know, chia seeds, walnuts, all those things are really good. And don't get me wrong, like, we do get like extra stuff. I get a lot of the guys like baking things like banana breads, just because like, and putting sugar in there like quite a bit, so that, because they need the energy. But my kind of rule is like, you can kind of eat whatever you want as long as you make it at home. And like, you can put like sugar and brown sugar and all that, and that gets like demonized a lot in the media. Calories. It's just more, not so much that I don't think like you should never eat out or do whatever. Again, it's a way we can control, and we know what it is exactly getting in there. Like, okay, if I say have some banana bread at morning tea, and you just go to the cafe down the road. It's not that I think that the cafe is bad or anything, or shouldn't. I just don't know what's in it. And it's like, if you're doing that every second day or every day after training and we're not losing weight, it's like, okay, there's probably something in there that's
a good point.
So why don't we make it ourselves, so we know what we're working with, type thing? Or if like, I don't know, whatever it is they like, if they're like, man, I just love chopped chip muffins, it's like, that's cool, but like, let's make them and we'll do them, so I know how much is in there and we can program for that, you know?
I do find, I mean, look, I cook and stuff, and, you know, me and my wife, we've obviously, we make a lot of our meals, and we try to obviously replicate a lot of the stuff that we eat out. And I do find that when I do compare them, and even when I break down their nutrients, and there is a massive comparison in terms of like buying it out and making it yourself, you know, in terms of it being healthy, a healthier version. But with athletes, you know, obviously now I wanted to get into that, because I know you had a topic about some time ago about when the whole vegan, you know, with the vegan movement. And I remember reading an article that you had put up about it. And like for myself, I remember when I was cutting weight, salmon really triggered my weight loss. Like salmon, just for some reason, when I had salmon, I just felt like I was stripping weight out. And I'm sure you have so many athletes that, you know, some red meat, you know, I feel like for me, I don't know if it's a mental thing, but I feel like, I mean, I love my red meat, but I felt like it doesn't react to me the way that it does for other people. How do you go about that, bro? Like, in terms of knowing that, hey, you know, salmon works with this guy, but not with this guy. A bit of red meat or pork works with this guy, but doesn't really work with this person. How do you kind of monitor and figure? Is that just through trial and error, or?
Oh, it's like in our assessment, right? Like we have a whole section about
Yeah,
like
yeah,
food
yeah,
preferences, food intolerances, but
yeah.
that's like super common. Some people will just be like, hey, I don't eat, you know, I'm vegan, or I don't eat eggs, or I don't like salmon, or I don't. And it's just like, well, there's lots of different options that you can mix and match. That's like the art and science of
Yeah.
nutrition, right? And dietetics is like what we do is like, this is the goal. And it's like a little jigsaw puzzle that you can move around and go, okay, well, you know, you don't like salmon or you don't like red meat, but you really like salmon and other fish. And like, okay, let's get some mackerel and some salmon and let's get some bass and whatever else and make up. But okay, you don't like red meat, but we want to get some iron. So let's increase your leafy greens and squirt some lemon on there. Or like, you know, we make sure that
Perfect. Yeah.
by the, no matter what diet you put together, you're ticking all the boxes by the end of it.
Because there's so many, I mean, different ways of being able to get that
Yeah.
nutrition, right? It's not just one thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or you just take a multivitamin, you know?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so like obviously I brought up the whole, I think from memory, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, obviously there was a lot of talk after the, what was that documentary that came out on Netflix, bro? You mentioned it in your, I mean, you wrote your article on the back of that, but you know which one I'm talking
Game
about?
Changers.
Game
Changers,
Changer,
yeah,
right?
Game
And I
Changers,
remember you
yeah.
wrote an article about it, and I knew you were, funny enough, after watching it, I knew that you're going to have something to say about it. And because I'd seen everyone around the world, nutritionists, writing about it, and I knew there was, you know, there's going to be a point where you're going to write something about it.
Yeah.
What's your, and I remember you specifically saying, like, because the way that that documentary got promoted, right, was it was just all like, I'm just kind of summing up what you kind of wrote, and was that it was all athletes that did really well pro-vegan, right? Pro-vegan
Yeah.
diet. But essentially what you're saying was that it was kind of tailor-made. It was kind of tailor-made to promote that aspect of it, that it was all athletes
Yeah.
that went on that were successful on a vegan diet. And essentially in the article you were saying, or what, you know, in your post that you wrote, you're saying that you shouldn't just take that as, hey, it's going to work for everybody. You know, and I
Yeah.
remember you were saying that, you know, just like it was very focused on people that were successful with that diet, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be successful for everybody. So what's your thoughts on that whole, you know, I don't want to really call it a vegan movement as such, because there is a lot of people that I've even spoken to that have really benefited off it. I personally haven't gone, gone on that diet to see if there's any kind of, you know, benefits from it. But, in saying that, I've never really had to, but even when I don't, like when I used to compete or whatnot, I may not eat a lot of red meat and stuff, but I ate a lot of fish. Like I said, fish really sat well with me, and it was something that I, you know, kind of figured out. What's your thoughts on it, man, in terms of, you know, like vegan versus, you know, not, in terms of peak performance and, you know, being able to perform at a high level for athletes?
Yeah. I think like, yeah, firstly to that, I think as a documentary, as a business thing, like I'm a businessman, like I like am in the, you know, marketing and got to do that and you got to sell. I think the way that it sold it was brilliant. Like I think the way that it portrayed an idea, the way it invoked a certain emotion and the call to action that it you know, made happen was fantastic. I'm not so much a fan. Like I didn't even get through the whole thing. Like I think I
Yeah.
had to turn it off like a third of the way through. I turned it off just because it's very wishy-washy
Yeah,
science.
yeah.
But I get it. Like that's just like everyone does that in business. I think the vegan diet as a whole is a great diet. It's super healthy. It's very hard to fault it if you do it correctly. And for, you know, some people who can follow it, if they do like the main things, like they look after, you know, main protein sources, making sure they're getting enough sources, B12, they're B6, they're getting all these supplements in, or these vitamins in, either through supplements or through food, you can't fault it. Like, and I think that's the way the world is moving, is going towards plant-based, and you can have so many conversations about sustainability, like, you know, how people can afford food and going, you can have so many conversations. The science is moving towards going plant-based. I think eating plants and protein is going to be the future. And I think everyone should be doing that for peak health and, you know, sustainability, and to reduce our carbon footprint. Absolutely. There's no argument there. My argument with it is that's in the health world. I live in the elite level, high performance world. And this is and I'm not the biggest fan of it, because the claims that they're making are saying that, you know, to be an elite level, high level athlete, you should be vegan, which just, you know, it's just not true. And then even if you say you can be an elite level, high level athlete if you're vegan, that's absolutely true. But there's things you need to look for, like the protein. You need to put these supplements, and it's like all the athletes in that documentary, they're all just funneling supplements in, which is fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But don't demonize the people that don't do that, because it goes both ways. Because you can eat meat and you can do everything and you can do really, really well. You could be UFC world champion. Both my UFC world champions love barbecue and they eat a lot of meat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, would I change them to a vegan diet? No, because this is working. Like if they said to me, hey, I really, really want to do it, yeah, we could probably make it work. And I would say they're still going to be elite level, high level athletes. The thing is that what they don't talk about in that documentary is when it goes wrong. And that can really go wrong, and it can really mess a lot of people up if you do it wrong. If you don't get those vitamins in, if you don't get adequate protein. And the example I used in this post was one of my female athletes who at the time was on the rise. She nearly ruined her career before it even started because her partner, he was vegan. So they were both doing it together. She had extreme anemia. She was to the point where she could barely get out of bed, extreme fatigue, but still every single day she'd grind out training. She'd just barely get through it. And she'd come home and just eat, aware of what she was getting. She was not just losing weight, but losing muscle. And it was really not a good situation. I kind of came in and went, no, this isn't working. Like for you, this diet is not working. So we reintroduced good quality meat proteins. And again, like we could have done it plant-based. It's just easier to do it through that meat avenue. And we pretty much took her from ruining her career to now she's the #1 female athlete in Australia and New Zealand in mixed martial arts. And she's this close to signing with the biggest organization in the world. And I'm not saying that wouldn't happen if she didn't change her diet, but it definitely wouldn't have happened this fast. And she was on a pretty slope down. And that's kind of the other, it's like, there's both sides to every story. And it's like, you can absolutely talk about that, but tell everyone about this, because if you're promoting this to a mass number of people, you know, things work on a bell curve. And maybe for 95% here, it'll be fine. But what about the 2.5% here? Like you're responsible for them. And what happens when they dip off the curve from going vegan or whatever? So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that getting across that information, you've got to present the facts as they are.
It's like you said at the start, man, education, right? You need to be educated correctly, like with anything, right? And this is no different, right? And if you're pro something, you got to kind of be honest about it the whole way, as opposed to just, you know, because like you said, there's a whole mass, right? It's on Netflix as well. So it's like everyone's watching it, and you know what I mean? And it's like when it's in front of your face, you're thinking, oh shit, that's all I got to do. And, you know, there's a large population of people that want the quick fix too. You know what I mean? In terms of being healthy and losing weight as well, you know, but if they don't know how to go about it the right way, like you said, supplementing as well, and all these things, it's just it's not going to end well, you know? So
oh man, I had so many athletes try it, and I did it with them. I was like, man, like, let's try it. Like maybe it is, maybe that is for you. And for, you know, maybe if we try this, like you with your salmon, maybe it just clicks and it works. But like out of probably the 30 of my athletes that tried it, there's 0 of them that stuck with it. So it's like
they missed the barbecues, bro.
Exactly. It's like whatever, but it's a great doco, and like the guy who ran it like has a like a vegan protein company. I'm sure he made squillions of it, which was probably the goal of it anyway.
I guess it opens up the dialogue as well, right? Like it just opens up a dialogue to have that conversation. And if that didn't come out, it wouldn't have people like you coming out and, you know, kind of, you know, providing your views and thoughts and rectifying a few missing underlining points in that documentary that, you know, was important. So
that makes a good point, man. I'll say quickly about nutrition and all, like it's so polarizing. Like people, for whatever reason with nutrition, they love to be one extreme or the other, and they relate their identity to their nutrition, because nutrition is such a personal thing. Like you put that food in your mouth and that kind of fuels who you are. So people really identify with the food that they consume. So nutrition science seems to really pull people So it's very easy when you have like documentaries like that to pull on people's emotions and spark these debates, because we need to kind of stand back and you leave the emotions to the side and you just slap all the facts on the table and go, this is where we're at. Like, what do we do with this?
Man, like, just to kind of, I guess, end things off, man, one thing that I wanted to ask, just, I mean, it's amazing. Obviously, like, I haven't kind of seen you from the beginning, but I caught on, and, I've obviously seen, you now working with, UFC athletes like Adesanya and Volkanovski, and, and these guys are now world champions. And, what's that like for you, man? A guy that, we just kind of went in your whole journey, you went to Canada and, you had all these ideas, and, from all of that to starting TFD, to now like working with, high level, athletes, and, and also seeing them, and also seeing the results as well, like, these, obviously you would know, like MMA in Australia and compared to the rest of the world, even with boxing and things, we're on the back foot, even, more so boxing still, but with MMA, I feel like, man, we're producing high level athletes now that are, world champion quality. So, what's it like, man, when you look back and, see where you are and where you're heading, and, just being able to, like, obviously you are doing something right, because you're getting the attention of all these athletes, not just, in Australia, but trans-Tasman, people, our neighboring countries, and, like New Zealand and stuff. And, what's that like for you, man, when you kind of look back at how your journey started and now, having quality athletes, high level athletes that the world know, and, and in the biggest promotions and the highest kind of MMA, platform as well.
Yeah, man. It's like, it's definitely like, it's very nice, but like, I think I always have to like remind myself as well, like when these athletes are inviting you as part of the team, like you're just one small part of the team. Like that's what I always kind of like remind myself and tell the guys in the team. It's like nutrition is just one small part. And it's like, I never really stopped to kind of think it all in, because I guess like there's always, in my mind, there's always more to do. And I guess I always think my reference point isn't so much like, yeah, it's great to have like those UFC athletes and the high level guys, but like the whole reason I'll come back to like why I started it was to kind of stop this crappy weight cutting and
Beautiful.
stop,
Yeah.
and stop people dying doing this.
Yeah.
And so I think it's great having those high level UFC guys, but more than anything, like they're a great billboard and poster board and message board to spread that message that I want to get out, and like
Yeah.
them and use them to show the younger guys and have that trickle down effect of like, oh, okay, like Volko doesn't do this like crazy no carb stupid diet and then sit in a sauna for days, so I don't have to do it. So I think like I always kind of put it back in perspective with that and think, well, where are we at with like the rules and regulations? And like, as much as it is, and man, I love my clients to death. Like I'm probably too close to them and too attached, but like it's just part of our sport. But where I'm really like passionate about it is like, okay, putting the research out there, because the research fuels change into the like rules and regulations. And that's really where I think the biggest part of the work needs to go. And although we've done some pretty cool things over here with the clients and whatnot, I feel like we've still got a lot to do over there, and like we're doing a lot towards there, but there's still a lot to go. So I guess in my mind, it's like, well, it's just getting started type thing, and so many big steps to go until like we kind of fix this problem. And whether or not it's my problem to fix, I don't know, but it's like we're going to kind of keep chipping away at it and give it our best go.
Well, you haven't forgotten the whole purpose behind why you're doing what you're doing, and that's the most important thing, right? And, there's never, I feel like, especially now, if you look at where nutrition was and in terms of the importance of it and understanding it to where we are now, where it was to where we are now, who knows where we're going with it, right? In terms of what we can do with it. And I think that was a beautiful answer, man, because I think if you, just, not forgetting that you started this because, it was purely a concern, right? It was things that you had seen, and you're like, man, this is not how things should be going. This is not how they should be going about it. And I think as long as you got that mindset, you're always going to find ways to elevate and keep pushing, the bar in terms of, when it comes to nutrition and dietary requirements and what we put in our bodies and how we prepare ourselves and etc. So that's awesome, man. Man, I don't want to take too much of your time, but man, I really appreciate it. I can't tell you enough how long I've been waiting, and I'm just glad we got a chance to at least sit and, you know, have a chat. And like I said, you know, every time I see videos of you people, it's always, you know, about nutrition, but I wanted to find out, you know, more about who you are as a person, and what kind of got you down this, you know, road of, you know, with what you do with diet, you know, with working with athletes and diet, you know, diets and dietitians. But man, all the best in the future, and keep doing your thing, man. You know, um, I'm a big fan, and so are the people. I told a few people, including my brother, that I was jumping on the podcast with you, and you know, and they're big fans, man. And I'm looking forward to, you know, seeing all your future work, and you know, keep those vlogs coming, man. I know you just started on it, but yeah, keep them coming, man. And man, all the best, Jordan, man. In the
Yeah,
future,
thanks,
and
man. Hey, I'm glad we could finally figure out a time to do it, and that's
yeah,
awesome, man.
yeah,
It's always,
for sure.
always fun for me to kind of
Yeah,
not talk about time and get a bit of a break from it. So I appreciate it, man. I really do.
nah, man, no dramas, man. I appreciate you, bro. Thank you.
Of course, man.